You think you know yourself. After all, you wake up every morning in your own skin. You know your name, your job, your likes and dislikes. But what if I told you there's a part of you, a powerful part that you've been avoiding your entire life? A stranger who lives just beneath the surface, shaping your thoughts, sabotaging your relationships, and influencing your choices without your permission. Carl Jung called this stranger the shadow, the unconscious part of your psyche that holds everything you deny, reject, or can't face about yourself. It's not just your anger or jealousy. It's your unmet needs, your childhood wounds, your buried fears and, paradoxically, even your hidden strengths. You don't see it, but it sees you. Every day. And until you learn to face it, you'll continue repeating patterns you can't explain and living a life that never feels fully your own. Jung's shocking insight: what you don't know about yourself is exactly what's running your life, and the only way out is in. Carl Jung didn't believe evil or weakness was the real problem in human beings. He believed blindness to the self was. And nowhere is that blindness more obvious or more dangerous than in what he called the shadow. The shadow is everything you've been taught to hide, suppress, or deny about yourself. It's the traits, impulses, emotions, and memories you pushed into your unconscious because they were too painful, too shameful, or too unacceptable to admit either to others or even to yourself. But here's the truth. Just because you ignore something doesn't mean it goes away. The shadow doesn't disappear. It hides. And while you're busy presenting the polished version of yourself to the world, collected, competent, likable, your shadow is lurking beneath, influencing your behavior in ways you often can't see. You know that time you overreacted and didn't know why? That irrational jealousy, that biting sarcasm, that sudden pull towards someone toxic? That's your shadow speaking. It shows up as projection when you see in others what you refuse to see in yourself. It shows up as self-sabotage when you unconsciously destroy the very things you say you want. It shows up in relationships, arguments, addictions, perfectionism, burnout, shame. And the scariest part? You'll think it's just life being unfair or people being difficult, when it's really your own hidden self trying to get your attention. Where does the shadow come from? Jung believed it begins forming in childhood. As kids, we learn quickly what parts of ourselves are acceptable and which ones are not. Maybe you were told that boys don't cry, that girls shouldn't be angry, that being loud was rude or being sensitive was weak. So what did you do? You buried those parts, you split them off. You became who you were supposed to be and disowned everything else. This is how the shadow is born. And as we grow up, we build lives around the parts of ourselves we've accepted, while the rest remains trapped in the dark, like a basement full of locked doors. But make no mistake, what you push down eventually pushes back. The shadow isn't just made of darkness. It also holds your repressed potential, the courage you never claimed, the creativity you shut down, the fire you extinguished to fit in. That's what makes the shadow so mysterious. It's not just the worst in you, it's also the best of you that was never allowed to live. So why don't more people face their shadow? Because it's uncomfortable, because it hurts, because to confront your shadow is to admit that you're not always kind, or in control, or who you pretend to be. It's to take radical responsibility for your life. And most people would rather stay numb, distracted, or stuck in blame than do that. But Jung didn't see shadow work as a punishment. He saw it as a path to freedom. Because once you bring the shadow into the light, it stops controlling you. You stop being a puppet of your unconscious. You start seeing people more clearly, reacting less defensively, and living more fully. You stop running from yourself and start reclaiming yourself. Facing your shadow is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. And that journey begins the moment you stop asking, "What's wrong with them?" and start asking, "What is this revealing about me?" Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That's not just poetic insight, it's psychological truth. Because one of the most powerful and deceptive ways your shadow hides is through projection. It doesn't just stay buried in your unconscious. it leaks. It sneaks out of you and attaches itself to others. And most of the time, you won't even notice. Projection is when you unconsciously assign your own disowned traits, fears, and desires onto someone else. It's when you say, "He's so arrogant," while secretly hating how submissive you've become. It's when you call someone selfish, unaware of how much you've been taught to deny your own needs. It's when you think she's judging you when in reality, you're the one doing all the judging. Why does the mind do this? Because the shadow is painful to hold, and projection becomes the defense mechanism that keeps you from facing your own discomfort. Instead of looking inward and acknowledging, "I feel insecure," or "I am capable of cruelty," the ego says, "That person is toxic," or "That group is the problem." It feels safer, cleaner, easier. But it's a trap, because as long as your shadow lives in other people, you never have to face the parts of yourself that are asking to be healed. And the result? You stay stuck, emotionally reactive, easily offended, constantly caught in the same arguments, same disappointments, same relationship patterns. You keep trying to change others when the real work is to see what they're reflecting about you. This doesn't mean everyone you dislike is your shadow. It doesn't mean bad behavior in others is always your fault. But it does mean your intense emotional response, especially the irrational, disproportionate ones, are often a red flag. When something triggers you deeply, it's rarely just about the surface situation. It's about something buried inside you being poked. Take relationships. If you've ever found yourself endlessly chasing unavailable people or feeling suffocated by someone who loves you too much, there's probably a shadow pattern at play. Maybe you project your own fear of intimacy onto others by calling them clingy. Or maybe you project your longing for unconditional love onto someone who clearly can't give it because some part of you doesn't believe you deserve it anyway. Or consider social media. The envy you feel when you scroll past someone's success story might not be about them at all. It could be your shadow screaming, "Why did you stop believing in your own dreams?" The irritation you feel towards someone being loud, passionate, or too much, maybe that's your own suppressed self-expression crying to be let out. Projection also hides in politics, religion, and ideology. We demonize the other side, not just because we disagree, but because we unconsciously load them up with everything we can't stand about ourselves: ignorance, hatred, fear, weakness. And in doing so, we avoid the far harder task of confronting our own inner contradictions. Jung believed projection was not just a psychological error, it was a spiritual problem. Because every time you project, you give away a piece of your soul. You lose access to your own emotional truth. You disempower yourself by blaming others for realities you've helped create. You become a passive character in your own story, waiting for someone else to change so you can finally feel free. So how do you stop projecting? You start with radical self-honesty. You get curious about your reactions. You start asking, why does this bother me so much? What fear is hiding underneath this judgment? What part of me am I trying to disown? You take your finger off the trigger and point it inward, not to blame yourself, but to reclaim yourself. The moment you see projection clearly, the spell starts to break. That difficult person becomes a mirror. That argument becomes an invitation. That judgment becomes a flashlight pointing to a part of you that's still in the dark. And once you bring that part into awareness, the emotional charge softens. The trigger loses its grip. You begin to respond instead of react. And here's the most beautiful part. When you stop projecting your shadow onto others, you also stop projecting your worth onto them. You no longer need approval, validation, or attention to feel okay. You stop chasing people to make you feel lovable or blaming them for your pain. You come back home to yourself. This is what Jung meant when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you recognize the shadow not as a monster to fear, but as a part of you crying to be seen, everything begins to shift. Because the truth is this: the person you're most afraid of might just be you. But once you stop running and finally look in the mirror, you realize you're not your darkness. You're the one who has the power to integrate it. Most people go through life thinking their biggest problems are out there: difficult people, stressful jobs, broken relationships, financial strain. But Carl Jung revealed a deeper truth. Much of the suffering we experience comes not from the world itself, but from the parts of ourselves we refuse to face. And when we ignore the shadow, the consequences don't just stay hidden in the psyche, they leak into every area of our lives. Let's start with the emotional toll. When you repress your shadow, those thoughts, impulses, emotions you label as bad or unacceptable, you don't erase them, you just drive them underground. But they don't stay quiet. They become anxiety that shows up in your chest at 3 a.m. They become irrational anger that erupts at the smallest inconvenience. They become chronic guilt, shame, or sadness that feels like it has no origin. You may go to therapy, read self-help books, or try to stay positive, but none of it seems to touch the root of the problem. That's because you can't heal what you won't name. The longer you avoid the shadow, the more it controls you from the dark. You become emotionally reactive, unstable, easily thrown off center. You live in survival mode, not because the world is always dangerous, but because your own inner world is full of unprocessed tension. Then there are the relational consequences. When the shadow is unconscious, it gets projected onto others, and that can destroy intimacy. You blame your partner for being too emotional, when really you've disowned your own vulnerability. You accuse your friend of being selfish when deep down, you're terrified of expressing your needs. You chase people who don't love you back or push away the ones who do, repeating cycles of abandonment, betrayal, or codependency. Worse, you attract people who mirror your unresolved wounds. If your shadow contains unworthiness, you may repeatedly find yourself with partners who devalue you. If you've suppressed anger, you may fall for someone who carries all the rage you don't know how to access. It's not Fatate's pattern, and it will repeat until you do the work of bringing your unconscious into the light. Spiritually, ignoring the shadow disconnects you from your wholeness. You can meditate, pray, journal, and seek enlightenment, but if you're only engaging the light parts of yourself, you're bypassing the very material your soul came here to integrate. Jung taught that the path to true inner transformation is not about becoming more perfect, it's about becoming more whole. That includes your light and your dark, your kindness and your rage, your confidence and your doubt. When you deny your shadow, you also deny your power. Because within the shadow lives your suppressed potential, your creativity, your sexuality, your assertiveness, your leadership. These qualities may have been shamed or rejected early in life, but they didn't disappear. They became dormant, waiting for you to reclaim them. The cost of ignoring the shadow isn't just emotional pain. It's the loss of your deepest vitality. And here's the worst part. This denial isn't just personal, it's cultural. In the US, we're taught to be relentlessly positive, productive, and polished. We're told to fake it till you make it, to smile through the pain, to keep it together. But this emotional suppression has a cost. It shows up in skyrocketing rates of anxiety, depression, addiction, and burnout. When a culture encourages people to cut off their dark side, it doesn't create health. It creates hollow success and quiet suffering. Jung believed that freedom does not come from suppressing what we fear. It comes from facing it, from turning toward the discomfort instead of away, from asking, what is this feeling trying to teach me? What part of myself have I disowned? Because once you meet your shadow, not as a monster but as a messenger, everything changes. You start to respond instead of react. You set boundaries without guilt. You speak truth instead of perform. You begin to truly feel that your life belongs to you. And that is the cost of ignoring the shadow. A life lived in reaction instead of reflection. A life half-lived, emotionally amputated. But the moment you choose to turn inward, the moment you choose to see the darkness, not as something to be feared but something to be integrated, you begin to reclaim what was never truly lost: your wholeness. So you've seen the consequences of ignoring your shadow: emotional chaos, broken relationships, suppressed potential. The next question is, what now? How do you begin the work of shadow integration? How do you meet the parts of yourself you were taught to fear, deny, or hide? Carl Jung didn't offer a quick fix. He offered a path, a lifelong, often uncomfortable journey he called individuation. It begins not with judgment or analysis, but with something far more radical in a culture obsessed with appearances: honest self-observation. Start by slowing down. Begin noticing your emotional reactions, not just the big outbursts, but the subtle shifts. When do you get defensive? When do you shut down? When do you judge others harshly or feel a strong aversion to someone for no logical reason? These reactions are clues. They are invitations to meet your shadow. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." For example, maybe you pride yourself on being calm and logical, but you get annoyed by people who express strong emotions. That could be a sign you've buried your own sadness or anger. Or perhaps you say you value independence, yet you feel secretly resentful when people don't give you attention. That could be a signal of a shadow need for connection or approval that was never accepted. This work isn't about self-blame, it's about self-reclamation. You're not trying to shame your reactions, you're trying to trace them back to their roots. Ask, where did I learn to suppress this part of myself? Whose voice told me this was bad or dangerous? Journaling can be powerful here. Write without a filter. Let the shadow speak. You may be surprised by what comes. Outrage, fear, grief, envy, lust, longing. These aren't negative emotions. They're human. They're energy. And when you face them with curiosity instead of fear, you reclaim parts of yourself that were long exiled. Another tool Jung recommended is active imagination, a conscious inner dialogue with the figures and emotions that live within your psyche. You might visualize your shadow as a character. Ask it questions. Listen to its story. What does it want from you? What is it protecting you from? Sometimes the shadow isn't evil. It's a wounded protector, shaped in childhood, still trying to keep you safe. It's also essential to move beyond the mind. The shadow doesn't just live in thoughts, it lives in the body. That tightness in your chest when you speak your truth, the clenching in your jaw when you feel anger, the sinking feeling in your stomach when you're ashamed. Shadow work involves re-entering the body and learning to feel without running. Practices like breath work, somatic therapy, dance, or even cold plunges can help you reconnect with your raw, uncensored self. And don't go it alone. You don't get a medal for doing this in isolation. Jung emphasized the importance of relational mirrors. Whether it's therapy, men's groups, spiritual mentorship, or honest friendships, you need spaces where you can be seen and challenged. Integration happens in relationship, first with yourself, then with others. As you move through this process, expect resistance. The ego will fight to maintain its identity. You might feel tired, irritable, confused. That's normal. You're dismantling the false self you've spent years perfecting. It's not easy, but it's sacred. You're reclaiming your fire, your voice, your wholeness. And one more thing, shadow work doesn't make you a saint. It makes you real, more human, more whole. You won't stop having dark thoughts or messy emotions, but you'll stop being ruled by them. And that, as Jung would say, is the beginning of true freedom. Once you begin facing your shadow, something subtle but undeniable starts to shift. You're no longer just reacting, you're responding. You're no longer chasing approval, but choosing alignment. And perhaps for the first time, your life starts to feel like your own. Carl Jung believed that the goal of life is not perfection, but wholeness. Shadow integration doesn't make you flawless, it makes you real. You're no longer operating from a fragmented psyche where good parts are inflated and bad parts are buried. Instead, your inner world becomes more integrated, more honest, and therefore more powerful. What does this transformation actually look like in your daily life? You start to notice you're less easily triggered. That person who used to provoke rage or jealousy, now they're just a mirror, not a threat. You've begun owning the traits you once denied. That doesn't mean you act them out recklessly. It means you can hold space for them without shame. That's real strength. To feel deeply and still stay grounded. Your relationships change too, sometimes dramatically. When you're no longer seeking to be saved, You stop unconsciously casting your partners into roles they didn't sign up for. You don't need to be rescued, and you're not trying to rescue anyone else. There's a different kind of intimacy, one that's rooted in truth, not performance. You may find your creative energy surging. Why? Because the energy once used to repress your shadow is now free. The anger you stuffed down becomes assertiveness. The envy becomes inspiration. The sadness, once numbed, now fuels empathy and depth. Jung believed that the shadow holds immense life force, and once it's integrated, that energy becomes available to fuel your art, your work, your relationships, your purpose. You also begin to trust yourself in a deeper way. You stop outsourcing your authority. The opinions of others still matter, but they don't define you. You can say no without guilt. You can speak hard truths without collapsing. You don't need to be liked by everyone to sleep well at night. That's not arrogance, it's self-possession. And here's something unexpected. You become more compassionate. Not just to others, but to yourself. You stop needing to be perfect. You stop punishing yourself for being messy, human, complex. And as that inner war quiets, your presence becomes calmer, clearer, more magnetic. People may say, "You've changed." And they're right. You've stopped living from the mask and started living from the soul. The world may not always understand this new version of you, but that's okay. Because you're no longer chasing belonging. You've become the place where you belong. This is the silent power of shadow integration. It doesn't just change how you see the world. It changes how the world sees you. Understanding your shadow isn't a one-time breakthrough. It's a lifelong relationship. Some days, you'll feel strong and grounded, like you're walking in your truth. Other days, old wounds resurface, and you fall back into the same patterns you thought you had outgrown. That's not failure. That's the work. Carl Jung never promised that individuation the path toward wholeness would be easy. In fact, he warned that it would often feel like walking through fire. But he also insisted that there is no greater journey a person can take than the one that leads them back to their true self. Shadow work is not about fixing yourself. It's about facing yourself. It's not about becoming someone new, it's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Each time you choose to pause, reflect, and respond with awareness rather than reaction, you rewrite your inner story. Each time you embrace a part of yourself that once felt unlovable, you reclaim your power. And perhaps the most beautiful part, when you do this work, you don't just heal yourself, you create space for others to do the same. You become a living invitation for authenticity, courage, and conscious living. So, as this journey continues, remember this: the goal isn't to become perfect. The goal is to become whole. To hold all of who you are, light and shadow, with grace, humility, and fierce self-respect. If this message stirred something deep in you, if a part of you felt seen, challenged, or awakened, drop a comment below. Tell us, what part of your shadow are you beginning to face? Or what's one truth you've uncovered about yourself on this path? And if you're ready to go even deeper into the hidden layers of your psyche, subscribe now and turn on notifications. This space is for those who are done living half-truths. For those brave enough to ask, who am I, really? Your journey matters, and you're not alone. We'll see you in the next chapter.